Putin and Trump will never meet again, and Tomahawks will fly here at the Kremlin. Is such a scenario possible, and under what conditions? Trump and Xi Jinping have already met, but has this changed relations and the course of the Russian-Ukrainian war? This and other topics we will discuss right now. My name is Iryna Uzlova, and today with us is Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report in English. Yuri, hello. Glad to see you. Thank you for joining us again and again.
Thank you for having me over again and again in Slava Ukraini.
Heroям Slava, thank you for your position and for your thoughts. There is currently no need for a meeting between the illegitimate president of the aggressor country, Russia, Vladimir Putin, and US President Donald Trump to resolve the Russian war against Ukraine. This was stated on November 2nd by Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov. The Russian propaganda agency TASS reports. Answering a question about the possibility of quickly preparing personal contacts between the leaders of the two countries, he said that what is needed now is work on the details and not a hasty organization of a meeting between the president of Russia and the US. Hypothetically speaking, it's possible, but there is no need for it at the moment. At the moment, there is a need for very painstaking work on the details on the settlement issue, said Peskov. Of course, Putin doesn't need this meeting because Trump cancelled it, I think so, although Putin himself repeatedly said after that the meeting was simply postponed but not cancelled.
I think we have to consider the meeting in terms of what purpose does it serve. And while we see that a meeting between the two can occur just because Donald Trump was delivered inaccurate information by Stephen Witkoff, and who assumed that the peace settlement is within reach, and therefore Alaska meeting in Anchorage took place. But if there is no meeting, that means that there's no purpose being served, because since then we see that Steve Witkoff really moved away from being, been retired effectively from being a Russian envoy, and now to avoid looking poorly in the eyes of many people, because Donald Trump left Alaska with nothing, to avoid the same fate of having negotiations that end with nothing, Donald Trump insists that there's agreement even made beforehand, essentially, which is kind of how diplomacy, I thought, used to work. So they would hammer out issues, and then they would meet and confirm things. It's kind of like what happened with China and Xi Jinping, where they had certain understandings and they were clearly able to come to an agreement, which they basically confirmed during their very short meeting. Because when a meeting between Donald Trump and another human being takes time, we know who does most of the talking. And if it has to be translated into Chinese, that's going to take even longer. So I think meeting with Putin is going to occur as soon as there's a way to basically justify it, to find a reason for it. And a reason has to be real enough that we have to be close to a deal. We now live in a society of, at least when it comes to government, of a deal as a sort of kind of a religious goal that we're all striving towards. We believe in the power of the deal to make things better, or at least so does our president. This meeting is going to occur as soon as there's a deal. And up until now, we see that Putin is stuck in a reality where he cannot stop the war, simply because no matter how many goodies, everything that America is going to bestow on Russian president, and remove all the sanctions and announce, proclaim Crimea, to recognize it as Russian, anything and everything, all Putin has to do is, submit to Trump. And I think Putin views the situation as fundamentally one where he cannot show weakness by submitting to Trump. He wants Trump to submit to him, which is really just give him time to do his dirty work. Of course, the problem there is that Donald Trump is willing to give the time and give time again in 2-week increments, as we know, and then 50-day increments until the next sanctions, now until November 21st, because that's when the next sanctions are going to kick in. And that's an amazing development in and of itself. But until we see actions, this is escalation of words. And the words are getting more and more powerful, but there is nothing that needs to be signed on paper, no words that lead to commitments, to documents. And as long as Putin is not willing to stop the war, I think this administration is going to not be willing to meet with Putin on these terms, at least for the next 2 weeks. But at the same time, it's important to acknowledge that somebody like Kirill Dmitriev, who arrived hoping that he will be able to accomplish so much and remind both Steve Witkoff and anybody else who will listen that you can do business with Russia. Russia is there, ready to do business now. Bring all your monies now. What was said about Russia many years ago by now deceased economist Slava Rabinovich, who declared that Russia is toxic. And I think that remains true now as ever. Russia is very toxic, and that's why all of these attempts by the Russian propagandists, as Secretary Bessent called Dmitriev, which I think is a very appropriate way of describing what he does, and all of his tunnels and all of his love boats and everything else that he can come up with as a proposition to American president, reminds how toxic Russia is and remains.
Talking about Dmitriev's visit, it was so empty, and it seems to us, to our politicians like Roman Besmertny, that Dmitriev only visited Washington and walked through empty Washington streets without Trump, because Trump had his tour, an Asian tour, without Marco Rubio, and so, and without any results for Russian Federation.
It's true, and this is really a big problem for our country. Not that, that Kirill Dmitriev is in the United States. Yes, that is problem number one, as far as that whole visit is concerned. But the fact that the situation that he encountered in Washington, D.C. is what apparently all of us are experiencing as well. We see capital that is dysfunctional. We see government that doesn't really work. We see both the air dispatchers who are air traffic controllers who are going unpaid, as well as all the service workers and security workers at the airport. And I just, when I fly, I say thank you. And if a delay occurs, that's what has to happen, because that's the world we live in now, where every day there's thousands of airplane delays all over the United States. And at the same time, starting November 1st, 42 million people in the United States are losing access to food stamps. And that means that we're going to have people starving. Well, perhaps. We don't know. But we know that with social media, there's drives in my community where people are saying pasta la vista November. And they're having a pasta drive for food pantry in town, so that those that have no money for pasta can have some food. That's the level where we're at. And if this is Dmitriev is proposing any sort of a project he wants, there's no functioning Congress to approve anything. This is, of course, can be said, this is exactly what President Trump may want. Because if he effectively, thanks to Speaker Johnson and Jeffrey Epstein, has been able to sideline the House of Representatives, which is now which is now closed, supposedly until government reopens, but they could reopen any time. But they're closed as well. So the city is closed, and it's a question of how much National Guard he encountered on streets. So Washington, D.C. is going through some tough times right now, which is by design, clearly, and with questionable results. But this is not a unique situation even to Washington, D.C. We see more cities across the nation. Chicago, which is the biggest city that I live next to. And what's going on over there with ICE agents wearing Halloween masks going out on raids on Halloween. There's far bigger problems than even Dmitriev can attempt to solve with his ideas. But it goes back to the fact that Russia is maybe it's Halloween and Russia is there on time. It's good fitting to see a Russian representative in the United States over Halloween, but we have a lot of perhaps far bigger fish to fry than Dmitriev.
But we see a next fact that Trump refused to exempt Hungary from sanctions against Russia oil. The United States has no intention of allowing Hungary to continue purchasing Russian oil from sanctioned Russian companies Rosneft and Lukoil, President Donald Trump said. He noted that Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban had sought permission to do so. Orban asked for an exemption from sanctions against Russia, but are refused, Trump emphasized. Thus, maybe this indicates the seriousness of Trump's sanctions intentions.
Absolutely. It does indicate seriousness of Trump's sanctions intentions. And I think this is what we see again and again. We see this. We saw this with India. Now we see this with Hungary. While President Trump is not able to provide direct pressure on Russia for, I don't know what reason, he certainly is willing to apply pressure because he clearly seems to be pinched for time. And we don't know whether it is due to the way he's been looking lately or moving lately or acting all his life. But especially lately. But he seems to be more interested in getting things done quicker because if you ask Putin, he's planning on living until 150, according to what we overheard when he was meeting with Xi Jinping. And in this situation, this gentleman, this president, 47th president of the United States, is acting with extreme sense of urgency. And even just a little while ago, he said that the only problem that Hungary has, it's surrounded by dry land, which is an interesting way to look at geography. But now apparently that's no longer a mitigating factor to protect Hungary from sanctions for continuing to buy that darn Russian oil. And we see this in different situations where things that were unacceptable to Donald Trump just recently are now acceptable. When he spoke in front of 800 generals, he said that there's two words starting with letter N you're not supposed to talk about. Now he's talking about resuming nuclear testing in the United States or by the United States, and it seems like without particularly much comprehension of what that actually means and what Russia is actually doing, because Russia is running out there scared that they kind of overstepped their bounds and are now trying to persuade President Trump that they're not as serious as he's making them out to be. Because apparently when President Trump escalates, that's some serious escalation. But that's just what we are experiencing with a president who is interested in making a statement. He is not interested in war, and that's very clear. But he doesn't mind pressure. He doesn't mind leverage. He doesn't mind show of strength, force, violence, if that accomplishes gets us closer to the amazing great deal, the next great amazing deal that is going to occur. It's an intention. There's no plan, but there's a clear vision.
Yuri, we see sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil, and really we see that Joe Biden didn't make such pressure with such sanctions, and Rosneft and Lukoil were free of such pressure.
Absolutely, because President Biden was saying that this is going to lead to higher prices, which it did.
But it's only for a short period, and now we see that prices for oil are really normal.
And that is often what we run into, where we have sensible people who suggest that we shouldn't do crazy things because they will lead to crazy results. Then somebody does something and the world doesn't collapse. We go, oh, what's the point of being sensible? We can do anything we want now. No rules apply. There's no gravity. There is gravity and rules will apply. And I think that sanctions on Lukoil, of course, are long overdue. Because regardless of what it does to oil prices, we need to do something about seizing Russia's funds from being able to finance the war in Ukraine. But we have to remember who is, behind these sanctions. Who is the president? Who is the person who stopped enforcement of the sanctions that existed when he came into office? And I think that we see that there's already information that Luke Oil is going to sell its assets to some entity that's going to possibly have connections more back to Kremlin, and this is just kind of shuffling things from one hand to the other. A circular transaction, a term we now use more and more. So perhaps who knows how they're going to rewrite papers. But it's nice to see they're feeling pressured. I think what leader of Russia is dealing with right now is that he was very confident that if he's going to help Donald Trump get elected again, president of the United States, he will have his problems resolved. This is what he's been waiting for a long time, all the years of Biden, until Trump is going to come and Trump is going to solve things. And Trump has come, and Trump is like an elephant in a china shop. And some of the plates are Russian plates. And they are very concerned about the Russian plates, but it's an elephant. And so I think that the uncontrollable elephant in a china shop situation is going to be an issue for Russia to be dealing with, as is for the rest of us all over the nation.
The US and China have agreed to establish direct military communications, according to Pete Hegseth. According to Pentagon Secretary, the US and China have agreed to establish direct communication between their militaries to prevent potential conflicts. I just spoke with President Trump, and we agree the relationship between the US and China has never been better. Following President Trump's historic meeting with President Xi in South Korea, I had an equally positive meeting with my counterpart, the Chinese Minister of National Defense, he wrote. What does this signal tell us?
That 1984 is alive and well. That you can have the countries that were always at war, but now they're always at peace, and the relationship has never been better. And tomorrow things could be different again. So subscribe and hit like so you'll always know whether they're fighting or at peace now or forever. Of course, we also have a president who is the greatest peacemaker of them all. Because he's clearly making a deal here with somebody that we can't quite see about the number of souls he is going to save. Bless his heart. But I think we see that China is emerging as the superpower that it apparently is, because, United States is proud of its relationship with China. United States depends on rare earth minerals from China in order to defend us from China. But why not? I think that this is just this kind of a world of constant contradictions where, what is it? Are you going to believe me or are you going to believe your lying eyes? Let's ignore the things that we see and just pretend that everything is great. I mean, there's jokes about, a number of jokes that we can all think of. I'm just going to skip to the punchline. This president is not showing our country well. He's showing himself to be bending over for China because of a situation, because of a crisis of his own making. There was no need to create the tariff war that is so damaging because it is being paid by American consumers and in the process also hurting our relationships with practically every other nation in the world. There was no need for this great tariff liberation to come down upon us, and it shows to what extent we live in a world, in a country where our president is showing that he's a president. He won the election. He has the support of the population, and at the same time, he seems to have no respect from either people who work with him or people who have to interact with him, who will present him like in South Korea, where they gave him a crown. I mean, it's a clown show. But the president is perfectly fine with it. And I think part of it is that he has no shame. And lacking shame, it makes so many things possible that having shame just makes them difficult. And in his case, he is just doing this thing every day, and with every press conference, this TV show starring Donald Trump, starring himself, that he does, and countries like China who plan for the far further future than 2 weeks, which is the eternity in which terms President of the United States operates. China thinks clearly far longer, and they know that it's okay to let him think that he won this one because everybody, A, knows that he didn't, and B, China is thinking long term. And long term, this is looking better and better for China because China is now that superpower that needs to be respected. And for the first time in decades, when Donald Trump and Xi Jinping met, the subject of Taiwan was not brought up. Well, I mean, I guess there is no problem then to speak of if there's nothing to say about it.
Yuri, Xi Jinping can play a crucial role in ending the war in Ukraine. U.S. Ambassador to NATO say about it. Matthew Whitaker told that China could be a tipping point in attempts to convince Russia to seek peace. This was stated on the air of Newsmax. There is no doubt that Xi Jinping plays a crucial role in ending a war in Ukraine, whether through purchases of Russian oil or through the supply of dual-use electronics and components for drones that the Russian Federation uses on the battlefield, he noted. The diplomat noted that he was very inspired by the results of the recent meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping, during which, among the other things, the parties discussed the war in Ukraine. But I don't believe that Kitai can change this. All supporting packages, not public, but in fact to Russian Federation, because China uses Putin and Russian Federation as instrument in war against and the United States and all Western European countries.
I think because we have to compare reality with statements by Donald Trump, and with the understanding that whenever Donald Trump speaks of a situation, it's always the same scenario. He was victorious. This was great. Everything turned out 12 out of 10. And then we just kind of go, really, what did actually happen? And it turned out that it appears by the results, because we have very little, there was no press conference afterwards. There was just Donald Trump speaking on his way from the bathroom on the airplane again. The U.S. doesn't have the leverage. We just don't have the weight right now to pressure anybody in, China at least. Maybe we are able to pressure Venezuela, we'll see. But we're not able to pressure China into ending its business with Russia, because the president came there, A, with the government closed and everything that I described earlier, B, with our soybean farmers losing their everything and living here in Wisconsin. I mean, this is a local story. And at the same time, also rare earth minerals, which are, again, bad time for a trade war, to put it lightly. And it looks like since the president was able to get everything back, this was probably not a good time to try to get anything else, about Russia, because that's like, so what does the United States have to leverage? I mean, China would like Russia, American markets back, and they got them back, but clearly United States was more under pressure here to get things done, and so they did. But Russia is not part of that package. The other side to this is that it appears that China is just not in a position to control whether Putin is going to conduct his evil war or not. China can be a sponsor, and it is the leading number one sponsor of Russian aggression. It can stop being number one. I mean, it could move to number 2, 3, 4, perhaps, and the sponsor of Russian aggression. But it is Vladimir Putin's decision when this war is going to be over, because he could stop any day. He could end now, yesterday, tomorrow, and it doesn't matter what China is going to do. And the same way that Russia doesn't need Trump to surrender, it doesn't need China to surrender. War is a political decision. And that's something that Vladimir Putin is showing us every day, because Russia has no really means for this war. It has to buy everything and then sell its future and in order to conduct it. But its leader continues to do it. So this is why it's so important that we see new stories about new oil refineries being destroyed, and actual, something that works better than sanctions and better than pressure on China, and that's just supporting Ukraine and Ukrainian armed forces, which are putting Russia back in its dark ages, where its understanding of morality and ethic lies. So they're being matched there in the cave, and that seems to work. And we'll see how Russians get through this cold winter, because Ukrainians know this, and I don't have to explain to Yuri that you know this better than I do. The people of Ukraine lived through this this is the fourth winter of this war, and for Russian people, this is going to be a big awakening. Now, nobody expects that they're going to rise up against Putin because their electricity is out. But, again, we're dealing with a very interesting situation where both in the United States and in Russia, for different reasons, we're going to have people who are going to be hungry, and how they're going to be resorting and resolving that situation in very different circumstances. Could be one of the interesting stories going forward for, I don't know, this winter, if not the next year.
Yes, but we see that every winter Putin wants to make problems for our energy infrastructure.
And every winter he fails.
Yes, and it doesn't affect for our strength and our standing in this war and our fight against a Russian dictator and his forces. So his tries are almost failure for him, and no more. Will Trump start a war against Venezuela, and is it a fight against Putin's friend? Also, we think with our journalist Dmitry Gordon in such case that Maduro also asked about helping by Putin. So maybe oil from Venezuela can change Russian oil on world market oil.
It seems like it can, but in about 10 years. It seems like we have a president who really decided to take upon the flag of President Monroe. The whole Monroe Doctrine that we're experiencing in the United States now, where the Western Hemisphere is ours, is a very interesting experience, kind of unfamiliar idea for many Americans, because we thought the danger was coming from Russia. But it turns out Russia is all the way in Europe and is almost like closer to China. So we have other problems that we're going to be dealing with, because the planet is so big and we're all, it's like a different world over there. So we're just going to concentrate on stuff that affects us, sort of, because, like, for instance, we have drug trafficking problems with, fentanyl, which really has to do with Mexico. But we don't want to attack Mexico. So instead, we're going to look really threatening to Venezuela, which is run by a government that nobody likes. Perfect. So we're going to show our strength and send some messages on a person that nobody likes, and who's going to support that terrible person. And that's always been the approach of this administration, of finding a target that's going to command the least amount of empathy and attack them. And in the process, destroying norms, possibly going around laws and doing all sorts of things that, again, no decent people would do. But this is not the administration made up of decent people. So what we are now looking at is a potential military action, the potential military crisis that hopefully will make some voters in Florida feel better about the drug war, and hopefully will help Donald Trump continue to attempt to take attention off the Epstein case. But if the Epstein case was not ignored, we would have a functioning House of Representatives. So we have issues there. But I think Venezuela is just something that is interesting, because in the Republican Party, there's those that are isolationists and those that are more interested in being involved in the world, perhaps in the way that Ronald Reagan saw our role in the world as being. And so those two sides are clashing, but it seems to me that both of them don't mean much well for Venezuela and for Maduro. So whether it's going to be isolationist Republicans like Tucker Carlson in charge, who will probably support Monroe Doctrine, which means why don't you go talk to Canada? Why don't you go take Greenland? Why don't you go deal with Venezuela and Colombia, but leave Russia out of this? And maybe that's what the president will just, that will be the isolationists, or it's going to be interventionalists who will want to change government and install democracy, in Venezuela. Either way, Venezuela is in trouble, but it's a lot of show because Donald Trump is not planning on actual war, because, I think that's just bad deal.
Yuri, thank you very much. Thank you for our today's conversation, for your thoughts, your opinion, your position, your support of Ukraine. See you next week. Take care.
Take care.
Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report and Rashkin Report in English. My name is Iryna Uzlova. Guys, subscribe please to our YouTube channels Rashkin Report and Rashkin Report in English, and War and Politics 24, and my YouTube Uzlova Talks. Thank you very much for watching. See you. Take care.